I'm going to go ahead and start the recording. So again, if you needed anything corrected on that list that I just displayed, please send us an email or put a comment in the chat. We'll get that corrected and we will send that list out after the meeting. And then the first item that we wanted to talk about was vendor cleanup and things that you can do in your vendor files to start getting ready to convert to the redesign or another software program. So there is a document on the LACA website that you can go to that will walk you through a lot of the processes that we're going to talk about here to clean up your vendor files. And the scenarios that are explained in that document are how to collapse 2 or more vendors using the Ven Change program if you find duplicates that you want to combine. It also talks to you about inactivating vendors that you have either never used or you have not used for many years. And it also walks you through a few scenarios that can help you verify your 1099 information. So for collapsing 2 vendors, like I said, that's the Ven Change program in Reflections. And you'll want to only combine vendors if they have the same 1099 information, the same check address information, and they're the same type of vendor. So if they're both memo vendors or they're both non-memo vendors. And the Ven Change program does have some checks and balances built in, so it will give you a report with some error messages if you have anything that you should clean up before combining 2 vendors. But when you actually execute that program, it's going to combine all the vendor history into one vendor record. So all the check information and invoice information will be associated with that one single vendor. And we recommend you keeping the venchange.txt that results from that program for audit purposes. This does only combine the vendors in your live files. So if you guys use change year for any reason, the change year databases will still be separate vendors, but we recommend you go ahead and combine vendors if you have duplicates now before you convert to the redesign, because right now there is no equivalent program to Ven Change in the redesign. So in the redesign, if you wanted to, air quotes, combine vendors, you really just inactivate one, and there are methods that you can go through to move dollar amounts from one vendor to the other if there's activity in the current year and you need to get everything together for 1099 purposes for the current year. But there's actually no way to truly combine vendors in the redesign like we have this program in Classic. For inactivating vendors, the document walks you through a Safari that we recommend you run out of Reflections, and you can review the last activity date of those vendors to decide if you want to inactivate this vendor if you haven't used it for a long time, or if there is no last activity date, then you haven't used that vendor at all. And you can then either go, if your list is short, you can go one by one and use SWeb and modify that status to make them inactive. Or if you have a big long list and you want to narrow that down to just the vendors that you would like to inactivate, you can then change the status in your CSV file and save that and then load that back into Reflections using the USA Load Ven Load option. But any inactive vendors will still import into the redesign. We just think it's a good thing to clean this up so that you have only your current vendors with an active status, because in the redesign, there is, as you load grids, it will load more quickly if you clean up your vendors so that you're only loading active stuff at a given time instead of pulling in inactive vendors into every program as well. This is also beneficial if you're not going to be converting to the redesign for a long time, because if you're going to remain on Classic, your secretaries will not have access to use an inactive vendor on a requisition in Classic either by marking it inactive. So it can help you in the meantime as well, not just preparing for the redesign. The document on the LACA website also recommends then once you do the cleanup and combine vendors or inactivate vendors, it recommends running either a Safari or 2 reports that are available in Reflections on the report menu to then just review all of your vendors. See if there are any that you wanted to inactivate that you forgot about, see how everything looks, see if you see any that should be combined, but this is an easy way to review your data after you've made some changes. And then a separate topic, equipment inventory. Anybody who uses the State Software EIS program currently, we recommend that you go in and look at your pending file and clean that up. And you can either go to the EIS report menu and run the EIS 501 to look at all of the pending files that are sitting in your pending report or in your pending file, or you can go into EIS screen and look at your pending file. And if there are any items in there that you know you are not going to add to inventory, go ahead and delete them from the pending file and get that pending list as short as possible. And then if you have not already closed FY19 in EIS, we want to just remind you to do that. Most of your audits should be complete by now. So you want to get that closed so that you can start entering your FY20 information. The next topic that we had for you guys today is talking about purchase orders in the redesign. So we have 4 districts live on the redesign right now. So this is targeted at them. And everybody else who else will be converting to redesign soon, this might give you a little glimpse of some options that you will have once you are live as well. So in the redesign, if you would like to close a purchase order, how do you do that? You have a few options. You can change the status of an invoice, and I have a screenshot showing there of a line item on an invoice that's already been paid, and you can see that this line item was paid in partial, but if you're looking back at your purchase order now and you're deciding that you're not going to have to pay any other invoices on this purchase order, you can go find that line item and you can click this action button over to the right, click the full button, it will change that line to full, which if that's the only item on the purchase order, it would then close that purchase order. Or if you have multiple items, you might have to do that with multiple lines. So that's one option for closing a purchase order, is to find that invoice and change the status of it, and then the purchase order could be closed. The next option is to amend the purchase order to cancel the item. So let's say it's a line item that you're never going to pay on, or maybe you had a line item at the bottom of a purchase order that was a comment, such as return this purchase order to a certain secretary or a certain teacher, and when you paid that invoice, you forgot to include that line item as well, you could just cancel that item to get that purchase order closed. So there's a screenshot there of how you would do that. You would first search for the purchase order and click the edit button, and then you would pick the amend option. After you click the amend option and you're looking at that line item detail on the purchase order, you would click the X next to that line to cancel that line. The third option is to enter a cancel invoice, which a lot of you probably do in Classic right now, or you used to do in Classic. So you would click the invoice button on the purchase order, and you would enter an invoice with a description such as cancel or close. You would scroll down to the line items, check mark the line items, which I'm showing you in the screenshot how to check mark all line items at once, and then click cancel. That will change the item status to cancel full. You would post that, and the purchase order would be closed. So when should you use any of these 3 options? You can change the status of the invoice as long as the date of the invoice is in a period that is open. If you would like to do the amend purchase order option, then that's typically going to be used for an item that a line item that you never invoiced, and you're just canceling that line item. And we did install a release on February 29th that allowed you to now amend to cancel an item with an issue date in an open period, or cancel a line item in an open period even though the PO date is in a closed period. So for those of you, Southwest Looking, who was live before February 29th, this may be a new feature for you. You may not have previously used the amend purchase order option very many times because your hands were tied a lot of times because that purchase order date was in a prior closed period. But if you're just canceling that line item, then even if that purchase order date is in a closed period, it's going to let you enter this cancel option through the amend option with a date in the current period, even though that PO date's in an old period. So that may now be an option that you might like now. And the third option of entering the cancel invoice, the date of the invoice that you're entering as the cancel invoice would need to be entered in an open period. And SSDT recommends trying to not enter a lot of $0 transactions. So that line item that I talked about, that maybe you have a description line on your purchase order and you really didn't have any dollar amount associated with it, and you're just trying to cancel that line item in order to close a purchase order, this is not really recommended for that option unless the first two options are not available for you. So what are your options if you would like to reopen a purchase order? We talked about closing a purchase order, you could change the status of an invoice, and that is true for reopening a purchase order as well. You can search and find an invoice that you keyed on the purchase order, and the invoice that you selected the status of full on, you would have an action button to change that to partial, which would reopen that line item on that purchase order. And that invoice date of that I just showed on the previous screen, of that invoice that you keyed with a full status, that date of that invoice has to be in an open period if you want to change that invoice status to reopen it. So if that is not the case, then your only other option would be to open a new purchase order, unless your district allows you to go back and reopen that posting period so that you can change the status of that invoice and then close that period back up. So if you want to open a new purchase order, just keep in mind that there could be a then and now situation that you have to account for now, and you may have to document that. So what is going to be impacted if you're closing or reopening a purchase order in the redesign? The account encumbrance on your expenditure account, of course, is going to go up or down. And the invoice status could be changing by you going and clicking that action button to either change it to a full status or a partial status. The purchase order status, of course, is changing because you're either closing it or reopening it. And I did say that you potentially would have an option to reopen a prior closed period. And if you do that, it's going to affect the reports from that period. So some districts are not reopening periods for that reason because it would change the encumbrances in that period, but that is something that each district can decide on a case-by-case basis what they want to do. But just keep in mind that if you reopen periods and then make changes to the status of a purchase order, it will change the encumbrance reports for that prior period. So I'm not getting any questions so far unless I'm missing everything in chat. Is everybody still with me and doing okay?
I'm here.
I'm not seeing anything in chat, Carrie.
CSC is good.
Any questions so far? Okay, then the next topic that we added for redesigned districts as well is regarding custom fields. So if you are logged into the redesign, you can go to the system option on the menu and pick custom field definitions. And under that option on the menu, you have the ability to create custom fields, modify custom fields that are already there, inactivate custom fields, or delete custom fields. So custom fields, we had some fields in Classic that were considered user-defined fields. We had fields on different screens that were like code 1, code 2, user-defined field 1, user-defined field 2. They were very generic. Some people may have used them for tracking whether or not you had a W-9 on file or something like that. But you really couldn't rename that field accordingly, but in the redesign you can. So you can also create many different types of custom fields, and those are listed here. Common ones that you're probably going to like to use, a Boolean is a true-false checkbox. You might want to put that on your screen somewhere to be able to check something, yes or no, on a vendor or on a certain screen. A code is a drop-down, so you can create your own drop-down fields. You can create a date field, a money field, generic text, a web address or an email that's going to make sure you're typing in a valid web address or a valid email. So you have a lot of flexibility with custom fields. And we really didn't focus on this a ton during training when we were getting districts live on the redesign, so I wanted to point this out now because you really have a lot of customization that you can introduce to your redesign screens using custom fields. So on your screen, I have a screenshot here. If you were to go in under Core and pick the vendor record and view your vendor record as it imported from Classic, you can scroll down and see a section of the screen that says Standard Custom Fields. And this is a screenshot of just a few of those. So there's one called Category, one called Code 1, one called Money 2. I cut out Money 1, it was over to the right further. And then Text. So if you had information import from Classic into one of these fields, you could go find it under that system option and rename it so that it means something to you and your district. And if you never use these fields and don't want to use them going forward, then you could go to System Custom Fields and inactivate that field, and it will be off of your screen and not in your way, and you won't have to worry about it anymore. Or if there's something that you want to completely create from scratch, you can create new. So the screenshot at the lower part of the screen is an example of those standard custom fields after you've customized them. So maybe you want a checkbox to mark whether or not you have a vendor's W-9 on file. Or I created a drop-down of ACH type. So if you are paying this vendor by ACH, maybe you want to track if you have their checking account or their savings account on file. And then, of course, I didn't rename Money 1, but those are just two examples of what you could do to customize your fields. Here is a screenshot of that grid. If you go to System Custom Field Definitions, this is what you're going to see. And you have the Create button up the top left of the grid where you can create a brand new custom field from scratch. You can view these other fields that imported from Classic or edit them to modify them to make them mean more to you or delete them. I honestly at this point in time would not recommend deleting. I would instead modify and inactivate if you don't want the field to display in your screen. But you do have the option to delete, especially if you're creating one and you decide you created the wrong type, then go ahead and delete that one that you accidentally created. But it will let you delete. I mean, we could always add it back. I just, at this point in time, as you're getting used to this screen, probably would not recommend deleting. And you can see in this screenshot, I went ahead and filtered the grid down to the vendor. applies to if you look at like that fourth column, so that I was looking at only the fields on the vendor record that imported as custom fields, and then you could edit and rename these or edit and inactivate these as you desire. So here I have an example of a field that I showed previously for ACH type, and then on the right, the field that I showed previously for W-9 on file. So the ACH type, I picked a type of code, which is going to allow that drop-down option when you're in the vendor screen, and then I clicked the plus at the bottom of the screen to add the code CHK and the description checking, and the code SAV and the description savings. And you can do whatever you want for those codes or descriptions. That was just the example that I used. But to show you that the type of code creates a drop-down. And then the type of Boolean on the right for W-9 on file to show you that that was that checkbox that we saw on that previous screen. Do you have a W-9 on file? Check it if it's true, uncheck it if it's false, if you do not. And you can also see in these screens the active checkbox is checked on both of these, which is meaning that these fields are going to display on your vendor screen. If you are not using these, you could uncheck active and hit save, and they would no longer display. Okay, so the next topic that we had for you guys is fiscal year end things that you can start doing now. And we have talked about this in past years, but we're trying to incorporate both the classic steps and the redesign steps at this point in time, since we have districts on both systems. So for the first thing that we recommend you start doing is reviewing your requisitions. In Classic, you can run a RecDet or RecSum for your open requisitions and start reviewing that. Or if you are live on the redesign, you can run a requisition detail report or the requisition summary, and those are both in your report manager. And you can run that for requisitions that are not converted and start reviewing those reports. So if you have any requisitions on that list that should be converted in FY20, go ahead and convert those to purchase orders. If you have any requisitions that should not be converted, they were denied, they're never going to be needed as a purchase order, then we recommend you delete those so that they don't, especially if you are using RAM, so that they don't continue to export for RAM forever. And if you are on redesign, we recommend that you delete those so that they aren't tying up any sort of requisition amount on your accounts. And in the redesign, it's easier to monitor that on a period by period basis, since you need to have posting periods open when you're working with transactions such as requisitions. Also, as you're reviewing either of those reports from Classic or the redesign, if you see any requisitions that are already entered for the future, for July 1st or after, then you as the district need to decide if you're going to hold those and convert them after you are live in July and already in FY21, or if you convert those to future purchase orders. Some districts hold off and some districts use for future purchase orders. So whichever method your district uses, review those and keep an eye on those on these reports. We also recommend, if you are a RAM district, reviewing the list of skipped requisitions in RAM and trying to clean those up as well. Looking at purchase orders, in Classic, you can run the PO detail or PO sum and review your outstanding purchase orders. In the redesign, the equivalent reports are the purchase order detail report or the purchase order summary in your report manager, and you would answer the question invoiceable as true when running that report. And then when you're reviewing those reports, we recommend you go ahead and cancel or close any old purchase orders that you are not going to need going forward. And review those other purchase orders that are still open. And are they itemized purchase orders? Are you really expecting the items to be delivered? Should these purchase orders be canceled because the items are permanently canceled and never going to be shipped? Or are these multi-vendor blanket open purchase orders that shouldn't cross into the next fiscal year? Should they be closed? So just review that report and decide what can be cleaned up, what can be closed, so that your purchase order list that is outstanding is as short as possible as you prepare to move into the next fiscal year. We also recommend that you review your outstanding warrant checks. You can run a check pay in Classic for all outstanding checks, and in the redesign, that report would be the disbursement summary for outstanding checks. And then depending on your district policy, for time limit, go ahead and either void and reissue old checks and send them out to the vendor, maybe call the vendor and ask if they have the check if there's a reason that they haven't cashed it, and file any voided checks with the Ohio Division of Unclaimed Funds if you're not reissuing them, if you're just voiding them. So we did have a tip in here. As you're running reports in Classic, you can save your settings so that you can run this easily next year or monthly if you want to run these reports more regularly. You can hit F11 in Classic to save your settings if you set a report up a certain way and want to be able to easily click F11 to recall your settings and run it every month or every fiscal year. And in Redesign, when you're running reports, you have the save and recall option at the top where you can enter your name, and that functions the same as this feature that you may have used in Classic. So I also mentioned future purchase orders. So if you have secretaries that are going to soon be entering future requisitions for next year, that requested PO date needs to be in the next fiscal year in order for it to successfully be considered a future requisition. If you are on Redesign, you will have to have that future posting period open in order for your secretaries to enter those future requisitions. And then future purchase orders, you would convert requisitions using the requested PO date, or maybe if you type a date in, you would want to use July 1st or later. And if you are in Classic, after you close FY20, you have to remember to go run auto post for future PO batch files to officially post those purchase order encumbrances. In Redesign, that's automatically done for you when you roll into the future month. And then there's also a message there for you that your users will receive warnings related to negative budget and negative appropriation based on the settings in your district database. So if you're on Classic, there are some settings in USAStat, USA Secure on each user, or there is a flag in USAStat USA Con for check future year balances that impacts those warnings. And if you are a Redesign district, there are settings on the user, or there are different rules that impact those warnings. So keep that in mind, because if you're not getting the warnings that you expect, let us know and we can look at that with you. Or if you're getting warnings, then maybe we need to change some of these settings to let your users successfully enter future requisitions. We also recommend that you verify your equipment inventory records at this point. Whether you're using state software, EIS, or another equipment inventory program, You can still run reports out of Classic and Redesign and make sure that everything is entered. So in Classic, you would run the BUDLED and for any 600 object code. And in Redesign, you would run the Budget Account Activity Report in the Report Manager for any 600 object code. And you see there on the screen that in Classic, your wildcard is the asterisk, and in Redesign, it's the %. So those are your wildcards when running reports to make sure you get all 600 objects. Compare that with the records that you've already added to inventory and add any that are missing. Review your board minutes for donated items and disposed of items and make sure those are all accounted for as well. When you're running the BUDLED or the Budget Account Activity Report, go ahead and enter a date range of July 1st, 2019 through June 30th, 2020, so that you're only looking at the records from this fiscal year. And then we will not have another accounting roundtable before July, so we have this slide in here for you, just to remind you that once you roll into July, if you need to refund a prior year expenditure, you would have to reconcile that FY20 check, receipt the money into a 5300 receipt code. And if you are refunding a prior year's receipt, you would want to post a purchase order, selecting the desired vendor who you owe that refund to, and on that purchase order use a function code of 7500 and an object code in the 900s, and then you process an invoice and a check against that purchase order to refund a prior year's receipt. If you need to reissue a prior year fiscal check, you cannot void that prior fiscal year check. You instead have to reconcile it, receipt the money into the 5300 receipt code, and then process a refund of receipt from that 5300 receipt code. If you're dealing with any of this in July, or maybe you've even recently dealt with it, we've had a couple questions recently where people were working on FY19 issues that they were trying to clean up. But if you're working on this at any time, there is a comment at the bottom of your screen that we just want to make sure you're keeping in mind, that you really should verify the calendar year-to-date totals on your vendor after you're doing this for 1099 purposes, because the information would not be automatically updated and you would need to adjust it in Classic. And then in Redesign, we want you to verify to make sure it's doing what is expected, or if there are any manual changes that are needed, we would have to do those through adjustments. So the next topic that we have for you is new hire reporting. And why should you worry about new hire reporting? In 1996, so yes, this has been around for a while, Congress passed the New Hire Reporting Act for employees and vendors, and this assists with child support withholdings and collections, and really speeds along that process and makes sure everything is getting monitored and processed as quickly and accurately as possible for those children who need that assistance. So that's the why we're doing this reporting. And who should you be reporting? Employers in Ohio must report any employee and contractor, and a contractor is any individual, sole shareholder of a corporation, or sole member of an LLC who provides services to you as an independent contractor for compensation other than wages. So this is you as the AP person paying a contractor, not the payroll person. The payroll person who's paying an employee wages, they have their own reporting process that they're going through because those employees are reportable as well. But you as the AP staff need to be reporting contractors who meet requirements as well. So You only have to report those contractors if you're going to pay them $2,500 or more during the calendar year. And there are some exclusions, so of course less than that dollar amount, or if they are a professionally licensed person that is providing those professional services to your district. There's a link there for you to go to if you're wondering if one of your contractors should be reported or shouldn't. There's some FAQs on there for you to walk through to help you decide that. And what information needs to be reported: the contractor's name, address, social security number, or tax ID, the date that your payments begin, and the length of the contract that you have with that contractor. You can report the date of birth, and then you have to, of course, report your employer information. So where are you getting that information? Everybody should be getting a W-9 form from all of their vendors before paying them, so that has a lot of that information on there for you. Or there's also an ODJFS Ohio New Hire reporting form that you can print from their website and have your vendors fill out as well, and that asks for like the date of birth and additional information that may not be requested on the W-9. You may also be able to find some information from contracts, like when the contract is starting, how long it should last. Does anybody else have any different method that they use at their district that they would like to recommend to any other districts on the call? Okay, so not seeing any in the chat, we're not hearing any. So how often do you have to report this, and how quickly do you have to report this information? No later than 20 days after the date that you sign a contract with the contractor or they start providing services under that contract. So a lot of times you as the AP person don't know when somebody awards a contract, but if you have an itemized purchase order open, you probably do have an idea that it's coming, or you at least know when you've received that invoice. And then when you're cutting that check, you can make sure you're at least reporting it then. If a contractor has a break-in service that is longer than 60 days, they have to be re-reported. And if you are new to the AP seat and you don't know if this has been done at your district, you can ask and see. If not, if you can't find any records of it, then the recommendation from the Ohio New Hire Reporting website is if you've never reported new hires, or if there's been a huge amount of time that you have not reported new hires, then you should report any that were hired within the last 180 days, and then go along the process to report any new ones after that within the 20 days that you're typically obligated to meet. So how do you report this information? You can report it electronically by uploading information to the Ohio New Hire website, or you can print and fax or mail the information to Ohio New Hire. And what programs are available in Classic and Redesign to assist you with this? In Classic, the Then Hire program, first of all, has a VH reset option, which you may run at calendar year end, or your treasurer may run for you at calendar year end. But this is what goes out and resets vendors from reported back to reportable. So when you're setting up a vendor, you need to be marking them reportable if they need to be reported to Ohio New Hire. And then if you're running the program in Classic, it's going to flag the vendor as reported when they get reported, and then at the end of the calendar year, this program is ran to flip the flag from reported back to reportable so that they can be reported again if they meet that $2,500 minimum in the new calendar year. So that's one program that's out there to assist you in Classic with this process. And in Redesign, there isn't actually a reset program that you have to run. Instead, when you change the posting period from December to January, as your calendar year-end step advises you to, that actually unchecks the reported box on the vendor, and then that becomes reportable again, based on that flag on the vendor that says reportable. So there really isn't a process you run to do that. It just automatically happens when you change from December to January in the redesign. Then going forward, as you process check runs, you should be running reports regularly to see which vendors have met that $2,500 minimum requirement based on the payments that you've just issued. So in Classic, under the Ven Hire menu, you would run VH Report, or in Redesign, you would go to the Report menu and select Vendor New Hire Report. So that's on the Report menu, it's not in the Report Manager. And I would advise you actually add this to, if you have a checklist that you use when you run checks, when you process your AP check run, I would add this to your checklist just as a reminder so that you're doing it with every check run. If you currently do not use a checklist for an AP check run, for Classic, we have an example checklist out on the LACA website. If you do not meet this 20-day reporting deadline, there is the possibility that Ohio New Hire Reporting Center could fine you $25 to $500 per vendor. So that VH report that we just talked about, or the vendor new hire report in Redesign, what do those reports show you? They show you all of those vendors who have been paid at least $2,500 per calendar year, as long as that vendor's new hire flag is set to reportable or yes. So if you're not marking vendors correctly when you're setting them up, they're not going to get included on this report. So if you're running this report for the first time, we recommend you run it in projection. Take a look at that. If you have nobody on that list but you think you should, give us a call and we can help you review your vendors to see if you need to do some vendor cleanup to get this to work for you. If you're regularly running this every check run, we advise you run it first in projection. Review the reports to see if there are any errors that need to be corrected, because if there's an error on the vendor, it will not be included on the actual final report that you would either print and mail, or the file that you would be able to upload to the New Hire Reporting Center. And then once you clean up those errors, run the report again in actual. And when that happens, the system, Classic or Redesign, both, are going to flag the vendor as reported so that it doesn't show up on the report again this calendar year until the reset is done for next year. And it's also going to mark when this vendor was last reported for you as a reference. So here's a screenshot of what the VH report option looks like in Classic. And there is an option near the bottom that says force these vendors to be included. So if you know that you're going to pay somebody over $2,500 and you're submitting a report with this check run, and you know in the next few check runs you're going to be reporting this other vendor, you can go ahead and include them now if you want by putting that vendor number on one of those lines down there on the report. So you can force a vendor to be included even if you haven't paid them $2,500 yet, if you just want to go ahead and get them reported and be done with that requirement. And here's an image of what the same report looks like in the redesign. And you have the same option to force vendors to be included if you wish to. And this screenshot shows you what the classic vhreport.txt looks like. So you would be reviewing this information, making sure it's correct, making sure, yes, this is what you would like to send to Ohio New Hire Reporting Center. And here's what the same report looks like in the redesign. In the redesign, you do see that your warnings or errors are right here on the same report, whereas in Classic, they are on a separate report. So on this next slide at the bottom, you can see the error report, the venerr.txt that you would view in Classic if you have errors. And again, you have to correct those errors if you want the vendors to be included in reporting. So I have also said, make sure that your vendor is set up correctly when you're building a new vendor in order for them to be included in these reports. And what fields are important that you're verifying and make sure are entered correctly. The new hire flag needs to be marked yes or reportable in order for them to be included in these reports. And you potentially will see a flag if you're looking in your system as are or reported if they've already been reported this calendar year. Or you may see blank or not reportable if they are not set up to be included in this reporting currently. But when you're adding a new vendor, you need to make sure you're marking that correctly, either as reportable or not reportable, or they will not be included correctly in this reporting. The date payments begin is also a field available on your vendor record, and if you leave it blank, then when you run these reports, it gives you the option to go ahead and use the check date instead. So that's an option if you would like. The last reported date would be automatically updated by the system. The birth date, if you have that, you can enter that. The new hire social security number or tax ID, if you leave that blank, the system will use the 1099 ID. So if the 1099 ID and the new hire ID are exactly the same, you really don't necessarily need to enter them in both fields if you don't want to. And then the length of time is a number of months that you believe that contractor will be working with you. So a lot of times we get questions of what should I enter if this is a contractor who works with us all the time. And in Classic, we always said 99 because that was like the highest number you could enter in that field. But hopefully you would be able to find some sort of contract that would tell you a more appropriate length of time to enter for a vendor. And here's what your screen looks like in Reflections. If in Classic, if you're logged into Reflections and looking at Venn screen, the new hire fields that we just talked about are highlighted. If you're instead using USAS Web, then the new hire fields are highlighted here. So a lot of times you're filling out the information up above, but make sure you're looking down below and entering that new hire flag as reportable for somebody who needs to be reported. And there was a question in the chat, is this being recorded? Yes, it is. So anybody who is not joining us right now can watch later if you would like to share this with somebody else. So we saw the Reflections Venn screen and the USAS Web vendor screen. Here is a section of the vendor screen from Redesign where you have that drop down to make sure you're marking reportable on the certain vendors that need to be reported and the other fields that are related to new hire reporting in the redesign. So what should you do now? If you're already going through this process with every check run, good job, keep it up. If this is new to you, please look at your vendors and make sure they are being set up correctly as you're entering new vendors. And also add VH report or vendor new hire report in redesign to your checklists or to your processing so that you're regularly reviewing your database to see if you have any vendors meeting the requirements to be reported. So If you want to verify that your vendors are set up correctly, in Classic, we recommend you run a safari of your vendor information and look at the flags and see if anybody needs to be modified. And then in Redesign, we would recommend you go to your vendor grid, add any of those new hire fields to your grid using the More button, and filter your grid and see which vendors are set up to be reported and which are not, and see if you need to modify any of that information. If you need to modify the information, you can manually update it in Reflections, USS Web, or Redesign, or in Classic. If you have a lot of changes that are needed, you can use the USA Load Vend Screen option to upload a modified CSV file. Then going forward, again, make sure VH Report or Vendor New Hire Report is something that you're running regularly, and make sure that you're always updating those new hire fields when adding new vendors. And some districts, depending on what form you're using, you may have a checkbox that you want to add to your district vendor form to track these other fields that you need, or have you met your reporting requirement, or even if you have a W-9 back or not, because a lot of the information that you get for the new hire reporting comes from that W-9. So those are just some tips going forward to make sure you're meeting these requirements. Any questions on new hire reporting? Do I still have everybody with me?
ESC still here.
Okay, good.
Looks like
Thank
they're
you.
all still here, but very quiet.
So the next topic that we have, we typically give you an update on RAM at every meeting, and RAM is successfully working with districts that are live on the redesign. No issues there. There's still the one bug that has been around for a little while, whether you're on redesign or classic, that if you're deleting a requisition line item, RAM doesn't necessarily realize that. So if you have anybody saying that the updates that they made to a requisition are not being recognized in RAM, just give us a call, and if it's this scenario, then we can push it through. And then just the only other tip is to review your outstanding requisitions and delete any that were denied or that you no longer need. So does anybody have any questions or comments about RAM? Okay, not hearing any or seeing any in chat. The next topic is eFinance Plus, which currently, we probably mentioned this at the last meeting when we were together, that Heath and Granville were going to be implementing eFinance Plus, but if not, just so you're aware, they are working right now to train and convert to eFinance Plus, and they have a planned go-live date of July 1st, and they are working with PCCSA, another ITC in Worcester, to do that. So everybody else, all the other districts besides Heath, Granville, and Licking Heights is already live on eFinance Plus. All of the other LACA districts, as far as we are currently aware, will be converting to the redesign. And then these three districts will be on eFinance Plus. And Licking Heights was being supported by WOCO, a different ITC on the western side of the state, but with TCCSA implementing Granville and Heath, Licking Heights is now receiving support from TCCSA as well. So those three LACA districts are just going to stick together, and they will then be supported by TCCSA once they're live. And this map, I haven't been shared a more recent map since November, but this just gives you an idea of the districts who were live or implementing eFinance Plus in November. So, of course, the list would be a little bigger now because you see LACA's only on the list with Licking Heights, and they would have Granville and Heath listed as implementing now, but an updated map hasn't been shared with me recently on this. So the next topic is to talk to you about the status of the redesign project, and I believe Pat's going to talk to you about that. So if Pat's able to speak up.
Can everybody hear me okay?
I can, yes, Pat.
So the status of the redesign software, back in March 2019, there were only 35 sites that were live on the redesign and 43 going through the process. As of now, March 2020, there's 129 sites that are live on the redesign, with 114 in the current wave, making 235 total districts participating. Currently, LACA has 4 live districts as well, with 3 going in the next wave, which starts in July. The schedule for LACA's wave conversion and migration is on the screen now. So the wave that starts in July and with the go live date prior to December would be Mount Vernon, North Fork, and North Ridge. We did reserve the final wave, wave 10, for emergencies, whether they were staffing emergencies or any kind of emergency. We just thought we'd better prepare for that, as well as it'll give us a chance to convert districts that may have gone like EFP. We can like preserve their data. So what does a wave look like? Going forward, like in July, we haven't set the schedule yet, but we will start off with a kickoff meeting. There we will give you like a timeline of the wave. We'll give you like the expectations of LACA and an overview of things that need to be done, like cleanup items. We'll give you the forms ahead of time for certification to go live. We'll talk about third-party vendors that you may need to contact. And we'll also do training with you, probably like a week or 2 prior to paralleling. The parallel time, we would like, as LACA, like to see you go through at least 2 payrolls. And the paralleling is, you'll enter your classic data in the classic software and make sure it matches in the redesign. So you'll be entering the data in both systems simultaneously and making sure they balance to the penny. After 2 completed payrolls, you'll sign off to go live.
And they mean to the penny.
I'm sorry, what was that?
I said, and you mean to the penny. I chased a lot of pennies.
Yes, we do want you to balance. Yes, we do want you to balance to the penny because we need to make sure everything is accurate.
Does anybody have any questions on the redesign wave or the migration process?
Not hearing any or not seeing any in chat. Does anybody have any other topics that they want to talk to districts about today?
This is Chad. If you don't have anything else, I've got stuff, but a lot of it's due to, school closings and work from home and just kind of preparing for that. But we can talk about that in a little more detail and extensively after everybody else has all their questions.
Okay, and I did get a question from North Fork. They sent in a question ahead of time. I don't think anybody's on the call right now, but they were curious what other districts do for vendor lists. Do you keep any sort of printed out paper copy of a vendor list? And if you do, how do you maintain that? Is it in a filing cabinet? Is it in a binder? Or do you just keep your vendor list electronically? So Southwest Looking is saying electronically. Cindy McInturf says electronically. Mount Vernon says no paper copies. West Muskingum is saying electronic only. And Lakewood is saying electronic only through the vendor information in USAS. So I'm not seeing anybody saying they have paper copies. Electronically also for the ESC. Thank you, everybody, for putting that in chat. And they also wondered how everybody assigns vendor numbers. Does everybody just auto-assign vendor numbers in USAS, or does anybody have a methodology that they use where certain number ranges mean certain things? So Lakewood and Southwest Looking and West Muskingum are saying they auto-assign. Mount Vernon auto-assigns unless it is for an employee. Mount Vernon, what do you do differently with an employee? So Mount Vernon starts any employee vendor numbers with an 8 to keep them separate. Thank you for sharing that. The ESC auto-assigns except for employees in school districts. So they have a separate series for employees in school districts that they search through and assign the next number. Thank you, everybody, for sharing. I will let North Fork know. It looks like we have a few more posting in chat, though, too. Crooksville used to use a larger number that began with 800 for all 1099s, but now they auto-assign. And Cindy McInturf is sharing that they auto-assign unless it's a refund for transportation for their 21st century program or a refund in general. Then they have a different series that they use. I will make sure North Fork gets this information or listens to this part of the recording, so thank you everybody for sharing your district process. Does anybody else have anything that they want to ask each other before we discuss Chad's topics?
I'm going to take that as a no. So the only thing I had to point out, you know, I don't know if many of you are in the office today or where you're working from. I have no idea how widespread the usage of reflection is from home. Maybe you already have VPN set up through your technology coordinators that let you VPN back into the office and run it from a laptop or connect to your desktops and run reflection. And then LACA also has reflection on the web available that'll let you through Internet Explorer web browser run reflection and connect to, you know, log into USAS, USPS. So I guess my point is, one, I'm going to try to, we have 10 simultaneous user license for reflection on the web. It's always kind of been there as a, just in case, you know, you need to hop on at night and do something real quick, it's there. It wasn't really meant to sustain an entire day of everybody working from home. I'm going to buy some additional licensing for that and put it out there so that it can be used for that if people need to. I guess the other thing, just if you don't currently have a way to get on reflection and do your stuff from home, start looking into that now, start asking the questions, contact us. If you had a VPN connection through your technology coordinator and you just never used it, now would probably be a good time to ask them about it and test it out before, you know, the day comes when you have to run a payroll and then find out I can't do it from home. So I would just caution everyone, you know, maybe tonight or the next couple days, just try to get on from home through reflection, make sure you can, just in case it comes to that. That's really all I've got, unless you have some questions for me. Hearing none and seeing nothing in the chat, I assume there are none. If there are, just, you know, send in a ticket to us, send them, you know, send to me, ccarson@laca.org, you know, we'll figure out a way to get you logged in if you need to from home, but don't wait till the last minute. Thanks.
Thank you, Chad. So now on your screen, I'm showing a list of upcoming meetings, which we have quite a few on the list actually planned right now. And we will be keeping in contact with you if these are going to be remote meetings and just seeing how things pan out and what we need to do for each meeting. But if you're interested in any of these, they are posted on the LACA website, so you can go ahead and register for that so that we know that you're interested in that and planning to attend. The first one that we have, the April 7th Safari training, if you've never used that before, that will not be used once you're converted to the redesign. However, like when we talked about cleaning up your vendor information, that would be very helpful for you. If you don't know how to use it, you might want to consider sitting in on that class. And then we have a fiscal advisory meeting in April, followed by a redesign budgeting session immediately following that meeting for the districts who are live on the redesign. Anybody else who's attending that meeting is welcome to sit and watch that session as well, though. And then at the end of April, we have a payroll roundtable scheduled. June 4th, we have the fiscal year end accounting procedures at the fiscal advisory meeting. So if you help your treasurer with those fiscal year end processes, maybe you want to attend that meeting with them. June 11th is our fiscal year end payroll roundtable. followed by a fiscal year-end open lab. And that open lab is available to anybody, not just payroll, anybody who needs help prepping for fiscal year-end. And if we're still at a point where we need to be doing things remote, we would potentially do it just as a Q&A session through Zoom. But again, we'll keep in contact with you on how all of these meetings pan out and need to be held. June 6th, we have a redesign advanced reports training, which is intended for districts who are live on the redesign. We will repeat that advanced reports training with every wave so that when you need it, we will have it for you. But if you're interested in any of those meetings, please feel free to register on the LACA website. And then one final closing comment is the only way to achieve the impossible is to believe it is possible, from Alice in Wonderland. That is a quote that Pat found for us, so we can thank Pat for that. And everybody believing it's possible, we will get through all of these conversions together. I think the current wave 5 that went live in March would speak to you that it was a lot of work, but it was possible. They did it, and they stuck it out and got through it. And I hope, in comparison to the earlier wave 3, which Southwest Licking was in, I hope it was a much smoother process. So, does anybody else have anything else today? If not, I will end the recording, and we will, oh, the ESC commented, the ESC is glad they're no longer dual processing. So that does probably show you that it was a lot of work, but they still got through it. It was possible. But I will end the recording here, and we will share that with anybody in case you want to share it with any other members of your district if this applied to them. And we will also send certificates out through the website to those of you who attended today. If you don't have any other questions, though, hopefully this was okay holding this through Zoom. We appreciate your patience and willingness to do that.
I believe I registered everyone who had not previously registered. The only 2 I found was Lynette and Gail, and then I checked attendance for everyone that was on the call.
Okay, if nothing else, thank you everybody for attending. Okay, we'll talk to everybody soon. Take care.